So a couple of years ago, I went over to my friend Andrew's house to borrow his delay pedal. Now, I was specifically in this phase where I wanted to make pretty much every single video I did about John Mayer, so I wanted to highlight a specific piece of gear that I remember seeing him use during like the Where the Light Is era. But unlike something like a tube screamer that I had seen him endlessly abuse in the live set, this was from a much smaller setting, and it left quite the impact on me. It was on Mulholland Drive, like the intro to the show DVD, and he's just sitting there playing slow dancing, and at the bottom of the screen you can just barely make out these two pedals, one of which seems to be like a Boss tuner, and the other one is this big green pedal that he seems to be using as like a looper. Now this is where things started to get interesting, because I would eventually figure out that this pedal is what's called a Line 6 DL4, and that its main use is actually as a delay unit. In fact, a lot of guitar players would probably call it one of the most popular delay pedals like ever. And that's not even necessarily hyperbole. I mean, it's been seen from Frusciante's pedal board to Dave Grohl's all the way up to Noel Gallagher. And by the way, if you know anyone with Oasis tickets, please let me know. And with me having done a series on some of the pedals that several of my heroes were using at the time, I knew that the next step would be to go to that one, and I knew exactly where I could get it to do that. You see, I'd been jamming and recording with Andrew for years at this point, and I always remembered seeing one on this like giant pedal board that he had. So I was like, bro, would you mind if I borrowed this for a few days to make a video? And him being the gracious friend that he is, he said that wouldn't be a problem. So I drove over to his studio, got it off his board, took it back here, and started to settle back in. Now this is where the story takes just a little bit of a shift, because unlike some of those other pedal videos that I previously mentioned, well, that one was never actually released. But Michael, why? Well, thank you for asking. You see, it was kind of a twofold thing. The first of which being that delay has always been one of the more intimidating effects for me to comprehend when it comes to the electric guitar. It's not like something like drive, not necessarily saying that that's easy, but there aren't really as many parameters when you're just thinking about gain and tone and how much drive. With delay, there were all these different things. So they said analog and vintage digital and tape head and take echo and all these things I had never heard before. It just felt like there was a lot to take in, and it felt quite intimidating, and I'm ashamed to say this now, but knowing I had a couple of different projects that I also had to work on, and that I would have to eventually give this back to Andrew in a couple of days, I ended up scrapping the project pretty much entirely. And yes, this is the exact DL4 that I borrowed from him years ago. And that sentiment stuck with me for a while. I thought delay was just going to end up being one of those effects that I kind of shied away from. But the more I started building different boards and learning about the vast world of different effects units, I knew that one day that was going to have to change, and thank heavens it did, because eventually it did, and I learned, one, just how not intimidating of a pedal it has to be when you break it down, two, how crazy powerful it actually is, and three, that this right here, well, isn't even its final form. You see, this right here is the DL4 Mark II. It was actually released about 6 months before I originally borrowed Andrew's Mark I to make that video. It's essentially just an updated version of that original model, but released over 20 years later, and it's the thing that finally made the DL4 line as a whole make sense to me, and the one that I learned on. So I want to show you what I'm talking about real quick. So when it first came to uncovering this pedal, I wanted to start with the easy stuff, and to me that meant everything to the right of the actual delay types. So time, repeats, tweak, tweeze, and mix, and trust me, we'll get to tweak and tweeze in a second, because I know those sound like I'm speaking an absolute foreign language, but when it came to time and repeats specifically, it was like, this is everything that I've used in every other delay pedal before. Time being the subdivisions and the time between repeats, and the repeats being the amount of repeats you're actually getting. And I was like, okay, let's just go to work with that and leave tweak and tweeze at 0, see what we get. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is not the way to learn a pedal and to learn how powerful of a machine this can actually be. So I started looking up online, what is tweak and tweeze? What do these things actually do? And I found an article that wrongly told me that these are always like modulation and the amount of echo volume. So I was like, okay. So I started to turn it up with the different types of delays that I was using, and I found pretty immediately that I was getting something very different from what I was expecting, because sometimes it was bringing up the modulation, but depending on the different type of delay that I was using, sometimes it was actually bringing up like bit rate type of stuff and like bass and treble. And that's where I discovered this right here. the cheat sheet, which is what essentially ruined my experience with the other DL4 not having this. What I didn't realize was that tweak and tweeze, they're kind of like flex terms, and they change depending on which type of delay you're using. You might have it on the Adriatic delay, which would make the tweak and the tweeze a modulation thing. But you also might have this on like a very simple tape echo, which would just make these two buttons an EQ with treble and bass. Take all that bass out. So I'd figured out tweak and tweeze, and I had a couple presets I like, but that's not enough. It's never enough. You have to go all in, and I knew that meant figuring out the different delay types. And that's where I had to go back to the DL4 Mark I, because I realized some of these words, most of them were different, at least the ones in green were, but the white ones, they were newer. And essentially what it is the delays in green are everything from the DL4 Mark I, and all of the white ones are all of the different delays from like the HX family, from the stuff I had seen in the Helix. And once I heard Helix, I was like, oh, I've used that before. I know some of those terms. And I found that like with tweak and tweeze, and I guess basically every pedal that I've learned over the years, it pretty much takes studying the different ones to see what they actually sound like and just playing with them. And then you find your presets that you like and you just get to work. But I think it really gets fun once you start playing with the ones that you don't necessarily understand. Now, initially, I thought that would be my final move, like my big last act with this play that we called the DL4. But what I realized once I started going through everything is that this isn't even just a delay pedal and a looper, even though those are its main functions. One of the other things that people use this for in conjunction with the delays is actually its reverb. It's not listed on the screen, so again, I had to figure it out with the cheat sheet, but so at the end of the day, what did we learn? Well, I'll tell you, it's very simple this time around. There's a lot of very powerful pedals out there nowadays. Pedals that do really cool things that are really legendary. But if you don't take the time, the necessary time to actively learn how to use them, it's like you'll never understand the full capability of what something like this is able to do. And for me, it was all about intimidation, just seeing a lot of knobs and a lot of words that I didn't necessarily understand. Very similar to what happened with me with the quad cortex. Then once you do, you're able to have a better understanding of like why this is so legendary and how this is different and like who this is for and who would need this. And I don't know. I just think it's a cool moment. But at the end of the day, I don't think it matters what I think. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. Have you tried the DL4 Mark II? Are you a fan of the original DL4 Mark I? What's your favorite delay pedal of all time in general? Please let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I think specifically with me having used something like the Helix for a while and getting more into the world of like HX effects and just seeing people use them live, I think the video on the DL4 Mark II was something that was probably inevitable. I just didn't see it coming, and now, well, it's here. I think the delay, albeit sometimes quite intimidating, is one of the most unique effects on the guitar. And just learning more about it, like I haven't mastered it in any sense, but seeing some of the guys who have, it gives me this push to want to learn more about what something like this can do and how weird and how like beautiful the sounds you can get actually are. But if you want to know anything more about the DL4 Mark II, or specifically This is the 25th anniversary one. The links are in the description. Make sure to check it out. One of the best ways to support the channel, if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I use in this video, anything on the pedal board, make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you so much to all of my patrons. There's some extra exclusive stuff on there if you want to check it out and join the community. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most important of all, have a fantastic night.